Here's something that doesn't add up. A federal prosecutor is working late at his office in Baltimore. It's a little before midnight. At some point, he gets up and he walks out. He doesn't tell anyone he's leaving. He leaves his cell phone sitting on his desk. He leaves his laptop, which has the document he'd been working on all night, still open on it. And he leaves his eyeglasses behind. The glasses his friends would later say he needed in order to drive. A few hours later, his car is found about 70 miles away in the middle of rural Pennsylvania farm country, nose down in the shallow creek behind a well drilling company. He's in the water underneath the car. He's been stabbed 36 times. There's blood smeared on the driver's door. There's a pool of blood on the floor of the back seat. And here's the part that still hasn't been resolved, more than 20 years later. The cause of death wasn't the stabbing, it was drowning. The water in his lungs told the coroner he was still alive when he went into that creek. His name was Jonathan Luna. He was 38 years old. And the people who investigated his death have spent 2 decades unable to agree on the single most basic question you could ask about it: whether anyone else was even there. The county coroner ruled it a homicide, and he never changed his mind. His successor never changed it either. Neither did the one after that. But the FBI came to a different conclusion. Federal investigators leaned the other way, that Luna was alone the entire time, from the moment he left his office to the moment his body was found. And if that's true, it means something very hard to picture. It means a man drove himself across 4 states in the middle of the night, stabbed himself dozens of times, and then drowned. So which is it? That's the whole question. And what makes this one so hard to put down is that the more you learn, the harder it gets to answer. Every new fact seems to argue with the one before it. To understand how that's even possible, you have to back up a few days, to the last ordinary week of Jonathan Luna's life. His life story only matters here where it touches his death, so I'll keep it brief, then get to the case that had him under real pressure in his final days. Jonathan Luna grew up in public housing in the South Bronx. His father was Filipino, his mother African American. By most measures, he was a genuine success story. Fordham for undergrad, then law school at the University of North Carolina. He worked at a big firm, then the Federal Trade Commission, then as a prosecutor in Brooklyn, before moving to Baltimore to become an assistant United States attorney. He was married. He had 2 young sons. And in early December 2003, he was in the middle of a trial. The case was a federal heroin prosecution against 2 men connected to a Baltimore music label called Stash House Records. One of them was an aspiring rapper named Dion Smith. The other was an associate named Walter Poindexter. Luna was prosecuting them for running heroin. Now here's the detail that matters. The government's key witness, Warren Grace, was a convicted dealer working as a paid FBI informant, and during the trial, it came out that he hadn't exactly been a model one. He'd reportedly slipped his electronic monitoring, fired a shot in his neighborhood, and been caught with heroin of his own, unrelated to the case. When that surfaced, the defense attorneys accused Luna of not disclosing it the way the law requires. That's a serious accusation against a prosecutor, and it put real pressure on the case. So on Wednesday, December 3rd, the day this all begins, Luna offered the defense a plea deal over the lunch break. The guilty pleas were going to be finalized the next morning. Luna spent the evening at the courthouse drafting the written agreement so it would be ready for that Thursday hearing. He never made it to that hearing. And that's where the timeline gets strange. Almost everything we know about that night comes from machines. Luna didn't leave a note, and he didn't leave a witness. He left a trail of electronic breadcrumbs. Toll transponders, an ATM, a credit card, the clock on his office computer. Put them together and you get a timeline, and it's strange from the very first entry. That Wednesday evening, Luna was at the federal courthouse, working on the plea agreement. His computer shows the document being edited at 11:38 p.m. Right around then, he left the building, without telling his colleagues and without taking his work. And he left 3 things on his desk: his cell phone, his laptop, and his glasses. An FBI agent later testified to exactly that. Phone, eyeglasses, and the laptop with the unfinished plea deal all still in the office. Which raises the obvious question right away. Who gets up in the middle of the night, drives 70 miles into another state, and leaves behind the phone they'd use to call for help and the glasses they need to see the road? We don't know. We don't know why he left, and we don't know whether he left alone. What we do know is where the car went next, because his Honda had an easy pass transponder on the windshield, and that transponder left a trail. He headed northeast on Interstate 95 and crossed into Delaware. The first odd thing, since the direct route from Baltimore to Lancaster runs more or less straight north. Going into Delaware is a detour east. And near Newark, Delaware, just before 1 a.m., his card pulled $200 from a rest stop ATM. Then the route does something odd. Instead of cutting toward Lancaster, it loops. He goes up through New Jersey, gets on the turnpike, then crosses back into Pennsylvania over the Delaware River Bridge, and gets onto the Pennsylvania Turnpike heading west. On a map, it doesn't look like the path of someone going from point A to point B. One reporter who covered it called it oddly circuitous, not the route of a man being driven at gunpoint, and not the route of anyone with a clear destination either. And there's a piece of that drive nobody can fill in. Investigators figured the leg from the Delaware ATM to the turnpike should have taken roughly 40 minutes. It took far longer than that. There's about an hour, by some accounts closer to 90 minutes, that's simply unaccounted for. No toll, no camera, no receipt. We don't know where he was. Around 3:20 in the morning, his card was used to buy gas at the King of Prussia Service Plaza outside Philadelphia. There's reportedly some grainy surveillance footage from near that purchase. It's never given anyone a clear answer. And then there's the toll ticket. Luna had switched from using his Easy Pass to paying with paper tickets partway through the drive. And a ticket he used to pay a toll on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, sometime after 4 a.m., reportedly had blood on it. Sit with that for a second. If that's accurate, it means that before he ever left the turnpike, well before sunrise, Jonathan Luna was already bleeding. He exited the turnpike at the Reading-Lancaster interchange. And that's the last stretch of road we can account for. Somewhere off Dry Tavern Road, near the small town of Denver, Pennsylvania, in Brecknock Township, his car left the road and ended up in the creek behind a company called Sensenig and Weaver Well Drilling. At 5 in the morning, the first employee arrived for work. Around 5:30, someone noticed the car, lights off, front end down in the water. There was blood on the door. They called the state police. Luna was face down in the creek under the front of his own car, still in his suit, still wearing his black overcoat. His court ID was still hanging around his neck. That same morning, 70 miles south in Baltimore, Smith and Poindexter were due in court at 9:30 to enter their guilty pleas. Luna didn't show. By the time his colleagues understood what had happened, he'd already been found. So that's the timeline. And every piece of it raises a question the next piece doesn't answer. Now we come to the body, because this is where the two official versions of this story stop agreeing and never start again. The autopsy was performed by the Lancaster County forensic pathologist Dr. Wayne Ross, and the findings are not subtle. 36 stab wounds, 23 of them to the neck. Cuts and stab wounds to the chest, the arms, the legs, 7 to the hands. His throat had been cut. And, separately from the stabbing, the report documents blunt force trauma to his face, his neck, his limbs, and his groin. The cause of death, officially, freshwater drowning combined with the stab wounds to the neck. And the manner of death, that's the legal classification of how someone died. The manner of death was ruled homicide. The coroner at the time, Dr. Barry Walp, signed off on that. The water in the lungs mattered to him. It meant Luna went into that creek alive. Walp ruled it a homicide and never wavered, and his successors held the line, Dr. Kirchner, and then the current coroner, Dr. Diamantoni. 3 coroners, 2 decades, same conclusion, homicide. Now here's the other side. Within days, a very different set of details began appearing in the press, not from the coroner, from anonymous federal law enforcement sources quoted in places like the Washington Post and the Baltimore Sun. They leaked information about Luna's personal life and his finances, and the thrust of it pointed away from murder toward the idea that he may have died by his own hand, either on purpose or by accident. And about a year after his death, the FBI made its position more or less official, stating that Luna had been alone the entire time from the moment he left his office until he was found. The argument went like this. A lot of the stab wounds were shallow. In a suicide, shallow cuts can be what are called hesitation wounds, the marks left when someone is working up the nerve. The leaks suggested Luna didn't have the kind of deep defensive wounds you'd expect from someone fighting off an attacker. And then came the personal details that offered a possible motive. That he was facing a polygraph connected to $36,000 that had gone missing from a case he'd worked. That he had around $25,000 in credit card debt his wife reportedly didn't know about. That, according to some reporting, he'd been worried about losing his job, and that his name had turned up on adult dating sites. So you've got two narratives running at once. The county saying someone killed this man, federal voice is saying he did it to himself. And who's right? The frustrating answer? Almost every piece of evidence here can be read both ways, depending on which story you walked in believing. Take the defensive wounds. The federal leaks said there weren't really any, but the author William Kiesling, who spoke with the people who prepared Luna's body for burial, said the opposite, that Luna's hands looked, in his words, shredded, like he'd been fighting for his life. And the coroner rejected the mostly shallow framing outright. Walp said several wounds were deep enough to cause internal bleeding, and at least one penetrated nearly through the neck. Two opposite readings of the same body. When the autopsy was finally made public in late 2025, and we'll get to why that took 22 years, it listed 7 hand wounds, all described as superficial. So which reading does that support? An independent forensic pathologist who reviewed the report for the Lancaster newspaper made a sharp point. Hesitation wounds in a suicide tend to be clustered and parallel to each other, and the report didn't describe them that way. To her, randomly arranged superficial wounds looked more like a struggle than someone stealing himself. She leaned homicide, but cautioned that, without the photographs, she couldn't be sure. Then there's the blood. There was blood smeared on the outside of the driver's door and the front left of the car. But the big pool of blood wasn't in the front seat. It was on the floor of the back seat. And to a lot of people, that detail is the hardest one to square with the man driving himself. Because if Luna was bleeding out in the back seat, who was driving the car? Investigators reportedly also found a second blood type in the vehicle and a partial fingerprint. If that holds up, it means someone else's blood was in that car. But it's never led anywhere public. No second person has ever been named. And then the weapon, which only gets murkier. For years, the public account was that investigators found Luna's own small penknife near his body weeks later and called it the likely weapon. His own knife, which on its own cuts both ways. It fits a sudden close-up attack, and it fits a man using the only blade he was carrying. But the autopsy released in 2025 complicates even that. It describes a penknife found on Luna, unopened, with no blood on it. How that squares with the idea that he was stabbed 36 times with his own penknife is one more thing nobody has cleanly explained. You see the problem. Same knife, same blood, same wounds, two stories. By now you can probably feel the problem. So let me put it plainly. The handful of things nobody has ever been able to explain. This is why the case won't die. The glasses. He needed them to drive, and he left them on his desk. If he drove himself those 70-odd miles in the dark, that's hard to explain. If someone else drove, it's easier, but that's a homicide. The route. A direct drive would have taken about 2 hours. His took more than 4, looping out through Delaware and New Jersey for reasons no one has established, with that missing hour sitting in the middle of it. The phone call. Luna's father said his wife told him someone called Luna on his cell around 11 that night, though the accounts don't all agree on where he was by then. If there was a call, we don't know who made it or what was said. He'd also told the defense he'd fax over some documents. They never arrived. The back seat. That pool of blood in the back, plus the reported second blood type, are what keep the homicide theory alive even for skeptics. If he was alone, they're very hard to explain. And maybe the strangest of all, why does the FBI think he killed himself? Because they've never really said, out loud, on the record. There's a remarkable piece of this story. The coroner, Dr. Kirchner, said FBI agents approached him and asked him to change the ruling, to reclassify Luna's death from homicide to suicide. He refused, and then he wrote the FBI an official letter offering to hold a coroner's inquest, an open hearing where federal agents could lay out, in public, their evidence for why they believed it was suicide. According to him, no one ever wrote back. Think about what that means. The agency that leaned towards suicide was, by this account, invited to prove it in the open and declined. That's not proof of anything sinister, but it's the kind of silence that keeps a case like this alive for 20 years. For most of 2 decades, the autopsy itself was a black box. The report had been considered lost. Then, in early 2020, it turned up in the county archives, not in federal hands as everyone had assumed. Almost immediately, the Lancaster County DA's office had it sealed, arguing that releasing it could jeopardize the open investigation. A judge agreed, and it stayed sealed. The local newspaper, LNP, fought that for years. And in late 2025, after the case had been handed to a new team of Pennsylvania State Police investigators who re-examined it, the DA's office reversed course and dropped its objection. The autopsy finally became public, 22 years after Luna died. And when people read it, it confirmed what the coroners had said all along. Cause of death, drowning and the stab wounds. Manner of death, homicide. So you might think that settles it. It doesn't, because the federal side never officially endorsed homicide either. The case sits in a permanent split screen. In Pennsylvania, it's an open, unsolved homicide. State police still look at it, and a $100,000 federal reward has never been claimed. And yet the loudest signal from the federal side, for 2 decades, has been the quiet suggestion, through leaks, never on the record, that there may be no killer to find. I want to be careful here, because this is where it's easy to slip into a story the case can't actually support. So let me be straight about what we genuinely don't know. We don't know why he left his office, or why he left his phone and glasses behind. We don't know why he drove the route he drove, or what happened in that missing hour. We don't know whose blood the second type was, if the reports are right. And we don't know whether anyone was in that car with him. And critically, nobody has ever proven the other version either. Nobody has produced a suspect, a motive, a confession, a second person. The homicide ruling is a finding about the body. It is not a solved crime. After all this time, there is no who, and there's no why. What we're left with is a federal prosecutor, a man whose entire job was assembling evidence into a story a jury could follow, who left behind a death that refuses to resolve into any story at all. Two careful sets of professionals looked at the same body, the same car, the same blood, the same wounds, and walked away believing two incompatible things. Both have held those positions for more than 20 years. That's why the case stays open. Not because of some shadowy theory, because of the evidence itself. The real, documented facts point in two directions at once, and so far, nobody has been able to make them point in only one. Jonathan Luna died on December 4th, 2003. The reward is still unclaimed. The file is still open. And the most basic question of all, was he alone, has never been answered.